Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Celtic Way. I am your host, John McGinley. I'm joined here by Ryan McGinley, and we're here to talk about all the latest news happening at Celtic, including Celtic's response to an SPFL charge. We're going to have a wee look at Celtic's pressing game later and how that ranks in Europe and Scotland and how that can maybe improve. But first, before we get into a chat with Ryan, I've got a quick word from our new sponsor, S1 Jobs. The Celtic Way is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Glasgow and the surrounding area, you'll find the one for you at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. Ryan, that's the sponsor spiel over. How are you feeling today?
One step closer, one day closer to the return of Celtic. I don't know about you, John. It's been a very, very long week without Celtic. Although I've got to say, I have enjoyed the Champions League football that's been on display. Last night, the Liverpool PSG game was a bit of a masterclass and a bit of a smash and grab. But we're getting back to the real thing, the main event, which is obviously Celtic against Hibs. Arguably, well, maybe not even arguably. Well, if you're looking at treble, it is the game of the season so far because it's the next game in the Scottish Cup. Feels like it's got a big game atmosphere already going into it. You know, Hibs are quite close, I believe, to selling out their 7,000 allocation. That's exciting. There's going to be Celtic fans everywhere as well. So I'm just looking forward to Sunday. I've enjoyed a bit of downtime this week, but it feels as if we're gearing up towards a very, very important game on Sunday. I'm looking forward to sampling it.
It's funny, there's all sorts of different football fans, and do they just follow one club? Do they watch football across England and Europe and all that? For me, I've kind of switched off from football apart from Celtic this week. Just, I don't know what it must have been just because there was such a rush of Celtic games. There's maybe a bit of an overload on how much football there is on TV. I've actually not watched much football at all this week. So I'm glad to hear that you're filling that gap for us with your knowledge of what's happening in the Champions League. But we're not here to chat about all that. We're here to chat about Celtic. And Ryan, there was news yesterday that Celtic, as well as Motherwell and Rangers, were hit with an SPFL charge in relation to the use of pyrotechnics at the Premier Sports semi-final, Premier Sports Cup final as well. What is the situation regarding that? What have the SPFL done in relation to Celtic supporters?
So basically, Celtic were found to have breached Rule H34 in the semi-final and the final of the Premier Sports Cup, which was in failing to ensure, as far as it is reasonably practical, that their supporters did not engage in unacceptable conduct, which is the pyrotechnics that took place pre-match with against both Aberdeen and Rangers in the semi-final and final, respectively. Because of this, they've been handed a 500 ticket reduction to the next Premier Sports game to take place at Hampden, as well as a suspended 800 ticket reduction. Celtic have obviously came out with their own statement, as you'll bring up, but
yeah,
it's not just Celtic. It was to do with the different fans groups. I think it was Block E, the boys group, and the Green Brigade. So they've all found to have been guilty, and the clubs associated have been found to have not put enough measures in to safeguard the other fans going to the game and to stop these occurrences from happening. But so the SPFL have acted independently, and I think it's the first of its kind. This sort of suspension of tickets due to pyrotechnics. It is a bold step from the SPFL because they've not really intervened to this level. Usually it's been UEFA that's done that when these occurrences have happened in, say, for example, a Champions League game or a Europa League game. But this is one of the first times that the SPFL, the Scottish governing body, has stepped in and brought about charges to 3 teams that have directly impacted on these fixtures. So it's an interesting one. I'll let you read out what Celtic have got to say about that.
Yeah, and if if people are wondering, what's Rule H34, etc., I think the headline is that, Celtic have got a reduction of 500 tickets for their next game at Hampden in the Premier Sports Cup, and this 800 ticket reduction could kick in if there's another charge between now and 2027. I think it was quite a long period on that. So that's really what it's all about. And in response, Celtic had a pretty firm statement released last night. If you've missed it, it said, Celtic Football Club notes today's SPFL judgment relating to the use of pyrotechnics at matches. Clearly, it is hugely disappointing that our wider support will be negatively affected at future SPFL League Cup matches at Hampden following the actions of small minority. It is well known that we also currently face a UEFA suspended sentence as a result of the previous use of pyrotechnics, most recently the match against Borussia Dortmund, by a small minority of supporters, something which could potentially have a negative and damaging impact on the team and Celtic supporters wishing to attend an away match in UEFA competition to support the team. The club has been very clear that the use of fireworks and pyrotechnics at matches is illegal and presents risks to supporters' safety and to the club under the applicable regulations. The fact that the use of pyrotechnics by a small minority is now adversely affecting the attendance of our supporters at matches should act as a very serious wake-up call to those involved. So it seems... So there's a lot of issues around this fine. So I think, what the supporters who use pyrotechnics or what some of other supporters in general might feel that the pyro and the flares and the smoke bombs and all that adds to the atmosphere before these matches. Obviously, the stance of the club and increasingly the stance of UEFA and the SPFL is that they don't want this at matches, and now it's beginning to kind of impact in a sporting sense, in the sense of reducing ticket allocations and potentially other strict liability down the line. Where do you land on this? Because for me, I'll just chime in with what I think. I think the authorities could be doing more to be creating better spaces for this to happen, or explore the use of so-called safe pyro that happens in some other leagues around Europe. Is enough being done to kind of work with the fans groups here? And will this deter the fan groups from doing this in the future?
In terms of deterring the fan groups, I don't think it will. I think the people that do this pyrotechnics will continue to do it if they see applicable in a game. I think one of the big problems was, and I don't think there would have been as much made about it if there wasn't such a delay to the final, the League Cup final. That did feel like quite a lengthy delay. The semi-final as well, it did take a bit of a hold on those fixtures, because I remember the Motherwell and Rangers pyro was quite bad as well, and then the Celtic pyro, obviously. It's one of these things that I don't think it's going away anywhere in football. The pyrotechnics, I completely agree with you, and I don't know if it's a controversial stance, but I wish there was a middle ground between outright banning pyro and having it safely. I know, for example, in other countries like in Holland and the Netherlands, they actually send some of their ultras on like training courses for safe pyro in order to allow these people to safely use pyrotechnics in the stadium without anybody being adversely affected. For me, I don't think it's going anywhere, pyrotechnics. I think it sounds bad saying it's a young thing, but it is definitely one of the in things in football. I would like to see a middle ground between that, but at the moment, I don't want it affecting the club negatively. If there's certain rules that are in place just now, I would want the club and the supporters to adhere to those rules, because I don't want it hurting fans down the line. Celtic might not get to another. I mean, they probably will, but a League Cup semi-final game, and then you're in 2027 or 2026, and you're not even thinking about that, and then you've got that 500 ticket reduction. So it does seem like it seems like the event happened, and then there's been a break. There's been 3 months in between, and then there's been action taken about it. I would much rather have it done immediately so that everybody knows that they're all on the same page with pyrotechnics. This just seems like a bit of an afterthought. I don't know if it's a bit of a show from the SPFL to say this is our stance on pyrotechnics, but I'd like a middle ground between outright banning it and allowing it to be safely used in the stadium. I'd want there somewhere in the middle, because I don't think you're going to get rid of it. It's popular clearly with the ultras groups, but obviously there's rules just now that are saying it's illegal, etc. So it's all about finding that fine line, I guess.
I mean, the rules and regulations are clear that it is not allowed, and so I think the SPFL have been determining what kind of action they can take. I think they've made it so they didn't want it to seem like they're just targeting one club, because obviously there were similar charges against Motherwell and Rangers. I think they were just trying to get their ducks in a row and all that. I think with given it's a 500 ticket reduction and an 800 ticket reduction, it seems like they're potentially trying to target the groups themselves who are doing it.
Yeah.
And the kind of surrounding support of those groups, and whether that's something that Celtic would take into consideration in relation to what tickets they do withhold from future matches at the stadium will remain to be seen. It's pretty clear that Celtic are aligned with the SPFL on this. They're not against the SPFL on this. So it is a tricky one in the sense of fans do feel like this adds something to the general atmosphere and the general feel of the game, a big game feel. But at the same time, there are safety issues around it. Smoke bombs aren't ideal for people with respiratory issues, etc. Flares can be dangerous in the wrong hands if it's not used correctly. So there has to be an understanding around that as well. As always, for me, I'm just one of those people who thinks, can we not just get everyone in a meeting and just have a discussion about this and get to the bottom of this? Because I think having all the groups opposed to Celtic, having all the groups opposed to SPFL isn't ideal. You want a safe. I think that's very important. We're not really defending the use of pyro in the sense of using it unsafely, but use it in a safe way if it's possible. If it's not possible, then there needs to be a discussion about how it just is eliminated from the game entirely, because you don't want fans starting to be locked out of matches. You don't want this to continue or escalate into what UEFA seem to have been taking a really hardline stance on it, in the sense of they're potentially just banning an entire away support from matches, which would really, I think, end the patience of supporters looking in on this. From what Celtic says is a small minority, if the entire support gets banned from an away game in Europe, nobody's going to be very happy with that at all, are they?
No, not at all. And I'd like to underline what I was saying, because I see a couple of people in the comments. It's a very controversial subject. It always brings up discussion, regardless of your thoughts on pyrotechnics. If it's safe to do so, and there was a safe avenue to use it, then I'm all for it. But as soon as it becomes unsafe for supporters, if there is respiratory issues, then I'm not for it. But I'm just thinking the spectacle as a whole, I can see what it brings. You look at for example, you might even see it tonight when Rangers play Fenerbahce in Turkey. You might see some pyrotechnics from them. They've been doing it for what seems like decades. They've been the sort of benchmark for pyrotechnics. If it can be done safely, and who's to say that it's safe in Turkey, etc., then I'd be all for it. But as soon as it brings public safety into it, then there's a problem. And clearly you can't be impacting people at football games. At the end of the day, people are looking to go to the fans are the most important thing in terms of getting to the football and getting back safely. And if that's impacted, then then it shouldn't be done. But if there is a safe way, and if there is avenues to go down that by spacing the ultras groups out and having a respectable distance between those who aren't involved in the pyro and those who are, then I'd be all for it. But I realise that some people are very opinionated one way or the other in pyrotechnics. Yeah, and I think it's a discussion point.
I think the way it can work is you separate the pyrotechnics from the wider support, and have areas that are designated for that, like a fireworks display. Like when people go along to a fireworks display and there's bonfire night, etc., there's safe distances between stuff. And I think that is the way that it would work. But I think the current situation where it just seems to be a free-for-all and the groups are policing themselves, I don't think is ideal for anyone. I don't think it's ideal for them either, because as we're noting, the authorities are getting involved and they're going to start, it's clear they're now taking a stance. They're kind of drawing a line under the sand. I don't know why Aberdeen do we know why Aberdeen weren't included in this? Because they seem to have a lot of pyro as well, Hamden at one point. I don't know why they haven't been included. But it's clear that authorities are saying now, right, there's a kind of line drawn in the sand, and now it's up to the groups to respond. Will they fall in line? We don't know, because we don't we're not part of these groups. We don't know what their kind of outlook on this will be or how they will respond. I think in the past, some of the groups haven't particularly responded well to authority, so we'll just need to wait and see how it all pans out.
Yeah, somebody in the comments is saying that this was potentially Aberdeen's first offence. I know that Motherwell have been kind of done in the past with situations like this. Celtic and Rangers are no strangers to this sort of, rhetoric, maybe not the punishment, because they only really get punished in Europe, but this is the first time it's really happened in the SPFL. So yeah, it's a controversial subject. I'm glad it's happening. And in some ways, I'm annoyed because, it was the 3 month in between. It happened in November, December. Now it's getting spoke about in March. But in some ways, because the season's winding down and there's not as much pressure as what there was maybe 2-3 months ago, I'm kind of glad it's taken a backseat and it's been brought to the forefront when Celtic are only really competing in the Scottish Cup. They've got the league wrapped up. I don't like having extra sideshows, especially in the business end of the season, but it feels like they've only got the Scottish Cup to really focus on. The league will take care of itself over the next few weeks. So I'm glad this didn't happen, actually, in December, January time when Celtic were still fighting on more than one front.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else is going on in the world of Celtic? Well, we've got an article on the site looking at kind of Celtic's pressing game at the moment. Brendan Rodgers has been very vocal about Celtic's pressing game this season, and I think even in the game against Aberdeen last week, he noted that Celtic's pressing wasn't quite where he wanted it to be in that first half. We had the analyst Alan Morrison, who you may know from the Huddle Breakdown and other Celtic podcasts and channels. He does some work for the Celtic Way, and he's got an article up on the site looking at some of the kind of where Celtic measure in terms of their pressing game, which is quite interesting. Which I'm going to actually throw up now a couple of graphics for the wider audience if people just bear with me. So we'll just change the layout here, and we'll add this, which is Celtic's pressing game in the Champions League. And this is a radar, but it also shows the percentile in comparison to other teams in the Champions League. So if they're in the 99th percentile, for example, it means they're one of the most effective or one of the most prolific teams in that category. And I think what this shows, Ryan, is that Celtic's pressing game, they're in a defensive sense one of the most effective pressing teams in the entire Champions League this season, which is fairly impressive considering the resources that Celtic have in comparison to some of the other teams in the competition.
Yeah, this is the leveler that Celtic have got to use. It's all about that hard work and talent. And if you put the two together, then most of the time the hard work will come out on top. Obviously, you've got the talented opposition that Celtic are playing against. But even seeing that Celtic are in the 99th percentile in terms of pressures with 187.20, I believe that is. That's just that's a number to be proud of for Brendan Rodgers and his side. And it shows that it's not just maybe one or two players that are getting involved with that press. It's contagious. It's happening with the midfielders, happening with the defenders when they're off the ball. They're trying their best, but it all starts from the front. And I look at Daisen Maeda as being one of the biggest examples of Celtic's press and play. He presses from the front, either if he's playing up top or on the left or on the right. And in some occasions, he is the trendsetter. He's the one that's actually making that happen. He's making it happen for Celtic, and the other players seem to get it's contagious and they follow in his footsteps and his constant running. So seeing numbers like this, I love seeing this from the hard, because Celtic aren't going to get anywhere if they don't put in the hard yards in Europe. So seeing these numbers is a great indicator that they're stepping in the right direction. It is a leveler, their hard work in Europe, and I'm glad because they could have had these moments where they're pressing and they're regaining off the press, but they're still losing games. But the thing is, Celtic got to the playoff stages. They actually progressed in Europe. They played against Bayern Munich. They ran Bayern Munich close, who coincidentally absolutely hammered Bayer Leverkusen last night, 3-0, and it could have been more apparently. So it shows that Celtic are in the right direction when it comes to pressing. And it shows that you need to back this manager more next season, because they're just great numbers.
So if you want more context on all this, go on the website and have a look at Alan's article. Someone's raised a very important question that we're kind of going to answer here. Did we score any goals through pressing the opposition deep in their own half? Here's another graph which kind of shows Celtic's kind of what you would define as the impact of a high press, which StatsBomb say is shots generated from possessions that were won within 5 seconds of a defensive action. So that graph's here. Now Celtic are at the top of here. They're kind of 2/3 of the way up, but it goes from kind of worst to best here. So Celtic are below average in that respect in terms of their high press resulting in shooting chances, with I think it's around 2.7 shots per match. So that kind of shows that the improvement that Celtic need to make here is that they need to start turning their pressing not just as a kind of rearguard action, but turning that into aggressive attacking situations. And that will be the progress that Celtic will need to make in Europe going forward. Even in the Scottish Premiership, I think they're top of the table in that sense, but they're not streaks ahead of all the other teams. They're not streaks ahead against Rangers. They're not streaks ahead of Rangers, for example. So there's work to be done in terms of, turning that high press into these high quality attacking situations where you can start getting shots at the opposition.
But that's the exciting thing for me, is that Celtic have been so much more improved this season from last season. There was good performances last season, but maybe that consistency wasn't there. But largely there has been consistency from Celtic, not just in domestic football, but also in European football as well, getting results when in previous years maybe they wouldn't have held on against the better teams. You look at the Atalanta game, you look at even Club Brugge, who are in to the last 16 and doing really well by all accounts in that competition. Celtic, we're disappointed with a draw at full time, even though Brugge played so well in the first half of that game. There was obviously the mistake from Cameron Carter Vickers, but there was a disappointment at the end of that game that maybe Celtic didn't get more from that, which shows the improvements are there and they'll continue to be made. But the important thing for Celtic now is to continue playing at this level. That's the only way that they can get better, is by continually exposing themselves to these good teams, playing against these teams, allowing Brendan Rodgers to come up against these teams while manager of Celtic, because he can then learn. I do think he's an improving manager as well, even though he's in his 50s. He is, what maybe a few people would call still a young manager who's improving with every season. I think that's the exciting part for Celtic, and that continual improvement can only be good things for Celtic moving forward. This is clearly the level that they should be playing at against the big boys of Europe, and they've showed that they can mix it with the big boys as well, which is even more impressive.
A few question marks about our use of graphs on the show today. I was just kind of trying to demonstrate that Celtic's pressing is effective in a defensive sense, but turning that into attacking play has been the challenge in Europe, and that's where the improvement needs to come next season. So we don't need to go too in depth on all the graphs. It was just to give a kind of overview. Again, welcome to everyone in the chat at the moment. It's good to see a lot of lively debate this morning regarding the pyro subject and all this kind of Celtic press and stuff. Again, the tension turns to the weekend now, Brian. Tension turns to Hibs. Big away allocation, big match. How are you feeling about this one? How are you feeling about the build up to this one?
Oh, 2 wee seconds. My headphones have just disconnected. Give me a wee second.
No problem. Can you hear me? If Ryan can't hear me, we'll bring in some comments from the chat. Wazaboy says, we did press pretty well, and the Champions League also played well to break the press during matches, which was good. I mean, I do agree with that. I think we're talking about the next step Celtic can make in Europe, but I think the improvement in the pressing game from the last couple of seasons to this season was again an improvement. Ryan, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah. So I was just wanting to get your thoughts on how you're feeling about the build up to the Hibs game and how you're feeling like the week's progressing. I know the Celtic players had a couple of days off there, didn't they? I think a couple of them taking some time with their families or taking a couple of trips, but I think they were all back in training, obviously preparing in the build up to this one. They're all back at Lennoxtown well in advance.
Yeah, it was good to see some of the players posting that they're still in and around Scotland as well, enjoying some of the views. The weather is getting a wee bit nicer in Scotland, which is good. It seems as if the end of the winter is fast approaching. You've seen Austin Trusty alongside his partner up at St Andrews. They seem to be having a good time in there. So it's good to see that. I also enjoyed the Alistair Johnston video that came out yesterday with his Q&A. A couple of choice words were used in terms of his favourite phrases in Scotland. Not sure I can repeat those words so early in the morning, but he seems to be learning off of Greg Taylor in that regard with some of his patter, which was quite funny. But yeah, it feels like the calm before the storm for this game on Sunday. Celtic will obviously have that informed player at the moment. You'd presume leading the line. I know that was broken 20 minutes ago that Daisen Maeda has been named the February Player of the Month for the SPFL. So they've got the informed player in Scottish football at the moment, and I don't see why Rodgers would change that. I know Maeda played up front against St Mirren, but I think he'll play his best team. And at the moment, for me, John, anyway, or for me anyway, Maeda is the best striker at the club presently. He looks dangerous every time he takes to the field, and you play your best 11 in the most important games of the season. For me, it would be Maeda, Jota on the left, and probably Kuhn on the right, even though I think there's been a wee bit of debate on whether you bring in Yang for this game. But that healthy competition can only be good, and it means that whoever's on the bench at the weekend, if needed, can come on and make a difference, and they know that he can be trusted to make a difference because their numbers have both been quite good recently, particularly in Yang's case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm firmly on Kuhn starting. I know there's been a bit of chat around it, but I think it's just that's a recency bias thing for me. I think you go with your strongest team. And as we spoke about this yesterday, but I think Kuhn is that. I'm just going to bring in some comments from the chat. It's been lively today. It's like kind of opposing what we're saying. We're all about opposing viewpoints. We're not scared, if people disagree with us or anyone disagreeing with us, so we'll just bring in some comments for balance here. Francis Lester, regular contributor. The problem is games being delayed by smoke. It's a farce. It's not needed. Seamus Gallagher saying it's a big no from me on pyrotechnics. This game simple as. My ball saying It's numpty to throw flares. I've seen them being thrown at minimum wage steers at hand, and it's pathetic and brings nothing to my match day enjoyment. So he's pretty clear on that. And JD coming in one day, there would be a disaster from pyro, and all the people saying no pyro, no party will cry about it and say, why wasn't something done about this? So as I'm saying, there's strong feelings about this. And I guess the authorities are kind of acting on that. If the majority think, they don't want this at football matches, then ultimately the authorities will respond to that. Celtic will respond to that, and they'll try and cut out as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't take away from some of the tifos that these ultras groups do as well, which are just fantastic. Yeah. And I think there's a very much or nobody is against the tifos because of what they bring, particularly in big games. You think of Glasgow derbies, big European games. Sometimes the tifos are talked about just as much as the games themselves, and they really set the tempo. Remember the one of the wee boy reading the book about being heroes, about reading about heroes and wanting Celtic to make new heroes. Ones in the past, the Archangel, although I don't think Celtic actually won that game, but that was one of the best tifos I remember in recent times. And there's other ones that I'll be forgetting about, even some of the ones that were directed towards opposition teams. You think of the Red Bull examples, etc., the Valencia one too. So they add so much to the atmosphere. I don't think anybody's against them. And even both together, you put the pyro with the tifos. Personally, if it's done safely, I think it looks great. But if it does bring about a safety element or a lack of safety element, then it can't happen. And I'm completely understanding in why it can't happen. But that's just my opinion. People have opposing views, but it'd be boring if everybody had the same opinion after all.
Someone asking, what does tifo mean stand for? I believe it's from Italian language. It's from Italian football culture. I think that's where that word comes from, tifo. It just obviously just means an organised display of flags or a big banner, etc. I think everyone, as long as supporters are supporting Celtic in a positive way, I think people love the tifos. That's what people really. You're talking about some of the full stadium tifo displays there. Those are magical. I mean, the club run merchandise off the back of some of that stuff, given the powerful imagery that it creates. So there is a place for strong, organised Celtic support. It's just about doing it in the right fashion that, is agreeable to the majority of supporters.
Yeah, it does come from Italian for the word for tifosi, which is to do with the groups of supporters or ultras within a football support. So I think they bring so much to the game. I love seeing them. Whenever there's always that excitement when you're at the game and you're looking over, because I can see the ultras group just to the left of me. Whenever something's coming out, when it's a big tifo before the game, all eyes get drawn to it. You know that it's going to be shared all over social media, and most of the time, the vast majority of the time, well, in terms of the artistic direction, they're always brilliant. And they seem to be getting better year on year, and the supporters are clearly behind that because they go with the fund at the start of the season. So many supporters put their own money towards the making or the making of these tifos, so they're clearly for them. For me, they're one of the best parts of going to the games because there's always that excitement of what's going to come, and they get shared all over the world. So I think they bring a positive light to Celtic, and long may the tifos continue in that regard.
Yeah, and we've got plenty coming up on the Celtic Way. What have you kind of been thinking about? I think you're taking a look at the Celtic youth team and how their season's been going for us across the day, Ryan.
Yeah, I think they're in a really, really good position. They're near the top or at the top of the Lowland League presently, doing a really good job. Steve McManus is doing a really good job with the B team at the moment. And I think the biggest showing of success is the amount of youth players that are now making their way onto the bench. And it's maybe something that's not getting spoke about as much due to the successes that the first team are having on the pitch. The fact that some of these B team players are making their way. Yes, I know you've had the whole furore of will Daniel Cummins sign his contract, will he go to West Ham? But it's not just him. There's the likes of Francis Turley, who made his debut earlier on in the season. You've got even just recently Jude Bonner making his debut for Celtic and looking every bit the part. It looks as if he's evened out himself physically. Looks like he could maybe be ready to have a good loan deal at a Premiership or Championship team, or make the grade at Celtic if he does have that influence into going into the first team. But yeah, there has been that success. I'm looking forward to having a wee look at Steve McManus's quotes from yesterday. I know there was an interview that went out, so looking forward to bringing that to the Celtic Way website and maybe shining a light on something that isn't getting spoke about as much, because there is that is clearly a successful season at the moment, both on the pitch and off the pitch, and bringing those young players through from the B team to the first team. And long may that continue, because that shows that the conveyor belt is up and running.
Yeah, and there's a couple of players out on loan abroad as well, Ben Summers, for example. So there's kind of been a bit of cynicism around the B team project and what it can bring. I guess the proof is in the pudding, and whether you can start to bring more players from that process, from this kind of development path, whether it's the B team, whether it's sending players out on loan, can they bridge the gap into the first team? It's been well spoken about, but I mean, if the club feel good about it and they feel it's good for their development, then that is the most important thing. As we know, like, I think Hearts have been quite strong vocal supporters of kind of the B team concept recently as well, so they're happy with how it's working for them. It will work differently for other clubs. Other clubs seem to be scrapping it completely. So it's an interesting one, but it's one of those ones that you don't really know, because the results aren't right in front of your face at the moment. It's one of these things that you can kind of judge after 3, 4, 5 years. I think we all know that over the last 10 years, since Callum McGregor's introduction, etc., that the kind of pathway hasn't been quite as free flowing as we would like. I guess we'll see if the steps taken over the last 18 months or so will pay off over the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, fingers crossed that's the case, because it helps everybody. It helps the youth team, because those young players that are currently in the youth team, if they see one of their teammates going up, they'll be like, right, that pathway's there, I can make it in the first team. It also helps for the UEFA, the homegrown rule as well. If you've got players that can actually make a difference in the first team and are not there to essentially tick a box for European competitions, then that's great. The likes of Dane Murray, I know he made that mistake against Aston Villa, but the fact that he's been blooded into the first team, made that appearance against Raith Rovers in one of the last rounds of the Scottish Cup, seeing that they can make a difference in the team and come in for those games as a success story. I'm not expecting 6, 7 players to come in from the youth team every year. That's just, you hardly see that nowadays. The football has changed. It's difficult for that. But if you can get 1, maybe 2 out of every group, then I think that's a successful haul of players. You would obviously try and get more from that. You'd hope for 3, 4, but the likelihood of that happening, the law of averages, etc., and the amount of players that actually fall through the net, it's just too great. So if you can get 1 or 2 in every age group that are coming through, or every generation, then I would say that's a success story. And you see teams all over the world, even if their players aren't necessarily playing for Celtic, if they're still plying their trade in Scotland and the lower parts of the Premiership, the Championship, League One, then that's a success story, because they're remaining in football. You see it with Manchester City. Their academy is so good. I know they've got a far better academy than Celtic do, but a lot of their players don't make it at Man City, but they will make it in the likes of Belgium, the Netherlands, France, etc. So as long as you've got that pathway for players and they're staying in football, I know we'll always have that selfish view that we want them to make it at Celtic. But even if they're staying in football, then I'd say that's a positive, because you want these young players to be plying their trade. You want young players to be plying their trade within Scotland as well. So if they're doing that, I always look at the example. Remember, Ross County always had quite a few former Celtic youth players in and around their team. I know Marcus Fraser was playing for Ross County. Now he's playing at St Mirren. He was a big player coming through. He was one of the youngest players to play for Celtic, I believe, in a pre-season friendly. So the fact that he's made his career in Scotland and has continued to play as a success story in itself. You always have that selfish viewpoint, but as long as they're still playing their trade, then I'd say that's a success. If I can say that, a success in itself.
Okay, everyone, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us in the chat or the comments below. If you want to weigh in on any of the topics that we've discussed today, then feel free to do so. I'll be back tomorrow with Josh McCaffrey. We'll be having a further chat about all the latest news coming out of Celtic, and obviously we'll be hearing from Brendan Rodgers, etc. tomorrow. So things will ramp up towards Celtic playing again. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Any last thoughts before we head off?
One day closer to Celtic coming back. That's my final thought, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, thanks for joining us, everyone. Goodbye.
Cheers, guys.